risk of field work, even if you don't want to. I think that despite all the precautions, sometimes it just happens. You can't do anything. Yeah.
That's
Risk of
something that
field work,
it is
even
like
if you
part of
don't
life
want
now.
to. I think that despite all the precautions, sometimes it just happens. You can't do anything. Yeah.
Exactly. Because we come in contact, I mean, not we, but our field frontliners come in contact with children also, no, during rescue.
Absolutely. So my team members, Diksha and Pratna, are also here. Diksha and Pratna, if you can start sharing your screen, or if you need any permissions to share the screen, just let us know so that we can start.
Hi. Yes, Sashi. I think we can start off. And
I'm just sharing my screen now.
We are also live, right? So we can start.
Yes.
Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a minute. Yeah.
is everyone able to hear me okay?
Yeah, it's fine now.
All right. I'm sure everyone is able to see me. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar that we wanted to do that I think, considering the context of where we are right now, I think we sort of wanted to sort of have a conversation about what can happen in these troubling times, reflecting on what's happened to us over the last year. And I think that to a certain extent, we've all been affected by it in one way or another. So to a certain extent, we did want to sort of have a conversation about what that can mean in different contexts. I hope it's really useful. Diksha, if we can move on to the next slide, we can sort of just look at what are the rough topics that we're going to cover today, so you guys know what we're in for.
Pratana,
Yes.
1 minute. We have
Yes.
kind of a formal welcoming and a context setting before that, before we
Sure.
into the session.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I gladly welcome Surikala to welcome this webinar program. Surikala, please.
Thank you, Nidesh. So, everyone, and very good afternoon. So, I welcome you all for today's webinar on managing lockdown-induced stress. Some of you might have already attended some webinar related to how you can manage your stress. But believe me, today you are going to get a new cognitive behavioral techniques to deal with your stress, which has faced in during lockdown. And some of our childline team and the regional heads have been joined with us today. And the master trainers, state heads from especially from East and South have joined us in Zoom call. And we have partner organizations, the representatives have joined in YouTube live stream from East and South especially and other zones as well. So welcome you guys, one of you all for the today's webinar. And now I would like to invite Anuradha ma'am, the head of Southern Resource Regional Center, to give a background and context of today's webinar for more understanding to the participants.
Thank you, Surya. It's my pleasure to actually set the context for this webinar. And I definitely extend a warm welcome to all the participants in this webinar, especially the frontline workers and the directors and the CIF colleagues, and definitely a warm welcome to the technical support from Alternative Story and all the people associated. I think many of us would be wondering as to why this workshop, and definitely we have gone through some of the earlier workshops where Dr. Seshadri had taken us through self-care concepts and then how we can help ourselves better. But then what is different in this workshop and how is it going to help us? I think these were the questions in many minds, and many people who have participated today. So just to, I think, give a brief outline of why, and also what and how. Certain these three questions, I think we'll get some answers. Just to throw a brief background about the childline interventions. Every day we get more than 15,000 calls, which are taken by call center operators, the childline contact center operators. So they are busy all day from morning till until their shift time ends, taking continuously call after call, talking about abuse, crisis situations, the urgency with which one has to attend to these calls as well as pass down information to the cities. And more than 1,000 interventions nationally we have across childline centers who actually go down to the field and look at what is the need of the child and how we can help them. So there is a constant need for emergency kind of a support which needs to be provided to the child on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. So whether this has any kind of stress or anxiety coming down to the people concerned is a question at large. And within this situation, in the context of pandemic, we have been facing many issues like even coming to office because we are the frontline workers. In fact, an essential service being an helpline, and also extending the service to the children in spite of all the constraints in terms of the transportation, commuting from one place to the other, having our own families, relatives, friends being affected by the pandemic, and some of us maybe into some kind of economical stress and all kinds of other things. So in this situation, is this webinar really necessary? Is the question in some of our minds. I think it's a big yes, because basically we have been into all these things, but have we ever thought that we can help ourselves better? And if so, whether this help can be definitely done by ourselves, and then how is it done? What are the techniques? So some of these questions I'm sure will be answered in this workshop, and it will help us help ourselves better. So all of you all, warm welcome to this workshop, and I request all of you all to definitely benefit from this workshop so that you can help yourselves as well as the children on the field. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anuradha ma'am. I think that having been on that side of crisis intervention, I know how important it is to take care of oneself. I think one very important thing that we say at All Story is you can't pour from an empty cup. So we're very happy to be able to replenish and help childline workers adapt a little better to this COVID situation. And often when we are in the field, we only think about the child and the welfare of the child, the well-being of the child. We want to take that focus a little towards yourself, towards all the workers. This is our way of ensuring that the work of Childline continues and the work that India truly needs today continues on a sustainable basis. So thank you so much for the warm welcome. I would like to introduce my colleagues Pratna and Deeksha, who are going to be conducting the webinar today. Pratna and Deeksha both have a master's degree in counseling psychology. Pratna has worked previously with multiple organizations on in crisis intervention itself, so she knows what the work is like. Deeksha has also worked and has recently graduated from Montfort Sampurna College, and she will be providing great insights today, both of them. And I hope all of you find this webinar useful. And we'll be taking questions as we go. So feel free to ask us questions in the YouTube chat or in the Zoom chat, and we'll be happy to take them throughout. Over to you, Pratna and Deeksha.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for that context and introduction from your team as well. I do think that I do agree that this can be a tough conversation to have, and I'm really happy that some context is being given for that. All right, so I think that we can go ahead and sort of take a look at how do we even understand what lockdown induced stress can look like, and how can we sort of start to manage that. I think that that's something that we're going to mainly be looking at today. Um, I think we can go ahead to the next slide, Diksha. Thank you so much. All right. So I just wanted to talk about what we're gonna discuss mainly today, so that you have the agenda in mind in terms of what today's webinar is going to look like. The first thing that we're going to talk about is, before knowing how do we manage lockdown-induced stress, I think it's really, really important to keep in mind the fact that the impact that this kind of experience has on your mental health can be very different for everyone. So I think, to a certain extent, to understand what kind of impact it must have had on you can be different from the impact it has from someone else. So what are the different consequences of on your mental health is something that we'll try to sort of gauge today. And I think that that kind of awareness can really help in then us trying to understand how do we adjust to it, and what is the best thing that we can do for ourselves in that particular situation. So I think the second part of today's module is also today's webinar is also going to be about defining or understanding what adjusting to this pandemic, to this situation, to a lockdown has been like, and what it can mean for all of us going forward. And as well as the fact that in the second part of the webinar, we're then going to look at what kind of strategies, what kind of coping can we really get more of in this particular situation. So I think we're really trying to understand what coping even means in the context of someone's mental health, and then understand what coping strategies can be looked at. What are possible coping strategies that can help you in this particular situation? So that's going to be
Sorry,
the
Pratna,
last.
your camera is not on. Can you just switch it on? I think that, yeah,
All right.
thanks.
Can you see me now? So sorry.
Yes, I can. Thanks.
All right. So the last aspect of it is going to introduce coping strategies as an introduction. I do want to say that these are not exhaustive, but we feel that understanding the very idea of coping can be a lot more useful than giving you very specific strategies. So I think that's something that we're going to do today. All right. Then, now with that in mind, I think we can go forward and go with the first part of today's webinar. Hi, Diksha, can you move to the next slide? Yeah. All right. So I think that, to a certain extent, can you move back to the slides? So I think before we start off, I do want to ask everyone a question about what they think has been the biggest change that they might have had to go through since the pandemic. I think it's something that I wanted to ask everyone about, that there must have been some changes that you must have gone through, and what do you think has been the most significant change for you? You can just sort of leave it in the chat box. Rashi will be reading it the um, from the YouTube as well. Hi, Seema. Would anyone like to share what they think has been the biggest change that they've had to adjust to since the beginning of the year?
Hi, so the YouTube thing has a slight lag, so just we're waiting for comments on that. But if Anyone wants to unmute yourself on Zoom and talk about the changes that you've experienced, that would be great.
It can be anything. If it's small, if it's big, it doesn't have to be.
This is Sukhendu, and hi, this is Sukhendu. I think there has been a change in the contemporary lifestyle and life pattern that we have been following since years, and and such changes we were not prepared to cope up with the sudden change that we have encountered in terms of the normal way of life that we led.
Right.
And with regard to some of the sections of the society, their survival has become at stake, especially with regard to the limitations that they are encountering while
Right.
having access for their subsistence. So this has become an issue of great concern, and they don't know how to cope up with such things, so this is it, the things that we have been following since years, since our birth, all of a sudden things have completely changed.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to cope up with the kind of sudden change that has happened in each and every aspect of our life.
Right.
Whenever it's our work environment, whether it's the kind of social engagement that we used to have, and especially with regard to children, it's something which they were not prepared to, and all of a sudden things have happened. So coping with such huge type of changes that has happened in virtually every sphere of their life, and
Right.
that too in a scenario where they were not prepared to go for such changes, it's something quite difficult, and
Right.
they are not being able to cope up with the new thing.
Right.
That's it from me.
All right. Thank you for sharing your experience. And to a certain extent, it's true that sometimes it can be hard to even process what changes has happened because this everything has changed to a certain extent. And you're saying that socially, a lot of things seem to have changed for you, work as well. So thank you for sharing that. And I think Seema on the chat says that using technology has increased to a large extent. So that's also a big change to sort of move from not necessarily being that dependent on technology now to sort of moving to a space where you use technology for everything in that share.
Hi, hi, I'm Harleen. Uh, I'm Harleen, and what has changed is a complete merging of areas. So there's no boundary anymore. So work was a different space, and it's not just physical.
Yeah.
Work was a different space, and your life outside work was a completely different space.
True.
But now, finding time or trying to establish a boundary between both things, uh, I think that this is the new normal. It's become very difficult to find that balance in this new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's absolutely true. That I think to a lot of extent, what work and the other aspects of your life can look like to sort of have those distinctions between them has become more difficult. Thank you. All right. There is change in direct social interaction. Yes, absolutely. That's very, very true that it can become really difficult to make these distinctions. I think before, because we weren't necessarily say using technology, or we had certain activities before to make these distinctions, traveling perhaps, that helped us say, okay, now work is over and now our life back home is started. Thank you for that. Any other experiences that anyone else would like to share about what they have had to adjust to, or what has been the biggest change that they have been following? All right. Okay. Have there been any responses on YouTube, Rashi? Should we move on?
I think we can move on. Yeah.
All right. All right. Disha, can you move to the slide? All right. So I think like some of you have shared these experiences, the reason that I asked this question was also that it seems like different areas of our life have been impacted by the pandemic and can look differently for different people. So I think some of you have shared experiences of work as an activity, as a part of our life that has changed so significantly for us. I think part of us have talked about how our relationship with work, in terms of when is it that we start working, when is it that we end work, and when do we have time for the other activities in our life. I think that blurring is something that some of you have talked about. As well as I hear that a lot of people have also talked about the fact that the nature of your work itself, in terms of the people that you must interact with, children that you must interact with, their access to resources, that affects you as well, because that means that your role in your workplace might also change. The amount or the kind of work that you are able to do must have also changed because of these changes. So to a certain extent, it's also that it's not just about how we experience work, but also how we feel we are able to contribute to a particular aspect of our work that we must have gotten used to. And I think, like has been shared before, that we may have gotten used to a particular way of working for a really long time, and perhaps sometimes all our lives. We have had some idea of what work will look like for us, and now that we've had to change that, the idea of work itself is changing to such a huge degree. So I think that all of those aspects are definitely some things that you guys have shared, that work as an experience as a part of our life has changed. Another aspect that I think a lot of you did talk about has been social life, in terms of social interaction. Some of you have talked about the fact that there has been a significant change, and sometimes, if there is a lockdown, then a significant loss in that sense of not having as much social interaction as before. I think a lot of us have had to adjust to, say, not interacting with people in the way that we used to. We can't say go to people's houses. We can't go to social events such as weddings, or be there for important moments of people's lives, which has been, I think, a big part of anyone's life in that sense, in that we have either everyday small moments of social interaction, like going to the shop, or going to travel, going to a public space and coming back. Or we have big events of social interaction, like someone's birthday, someone's wedding, parties. To a certain extent, we have all our own ways of having and keeping up social interaction that used to be a big part of our life. And now it has become, to a certain extent, what I have observed is that it's become a question. Every time you're invited to something, every time you have to meet someone, every time you have to go somewhere, that has become something that is a difficult thing to sort of really coordinate right now. And I think that has been quite challenging, especially I feel in a country like ours, in a culture like ours. I feel that, we're culturally such a social space. We have to keep interacting with each other. Community is such a big part of our lives on an everyday basis. We're so close to each other, and we find it so important to maintain social contact with each other, that not being able to do that, to say that you have to isolate yourself, can be really hard. Mostly because of the fact that since generations, our entire culture has been about time interacting with each other in these very specific ways. And changing that can be really big. And another thing that I suppose can also be a change due to the pandemic is family structures, because of that, because we're unable to interact with each other in the way that we're used to. Interacting with, say, your relatives, your parents, or the family that you might live in might change because of the pandemic, might change in the way that you have to make these decisions, or that you have to interact with each other. And that means that if it's for a while, if it's for a temporary period of time, then you can go back to interacting with your family in the way that you are used to. But if that's not possible, and considering the fact that we have been in this particular situation for a significant amount of time now, it's been what, 6, 7, 8 months, I've lost track of time. But to a certain extent, it's something that we've then had to know that our mode of interaction has to change for us for a longer amount of time. And to a certain extent, that changes our relationship with people, that changes our relationship with perhaps our family, our parents, our siblings, our children. I think some of you have talked about the fact that your interaction, your relationship with with your own children might change, because parents get used to a particular routine or a particular lifestyle of taking care of your children, and now we have to find new ways and new understanding of how to adjust to perhaps your children being home all the time. So to a certain extent, considering where you as an individual might be in your stage of life as a parent, as a child, or as an adult, perhaps living with your partner, or as someone who is used to going to school or a academic institution, all of those things can have changes in how you interact with your family as well. So I think that's been something that you guys have talked about, and that change can be something that can take a while to adjust to, for sure. Another thing that I think is connected to that is public life and spaces that people might have to experience change in. One of the things I think that was mentioned during the introduction was the fact that we sometimes have to travel to work, and now you don't have to travel all the time or as much. Perhaps say you would have taken, if you have taken say public transport or even driven a car to the office and come back, that activity is not there anymore. So there are certain public spaces that we don't have access to. There are certain spaces that we may have been in, even if it's just a restaurant, a movie theater, a park, any kind of public space and public life, is that we don't necessarily get to see people, and that can be really difficult, even if we're living with our own, even if we're living in a safe space, even if we're living okay. And to a certain extent, not being able to be around those can be also a big change to adjust to. So say for example, if we had a routine to say go out every weekend or so, or sort of go to school or go to college, not having to do that, even if you don't necessarily like class too much. I think just the activity of going to class can be a big deal. So not being able to go to institutions, or perhaps not being able to go to the office, is a space that perhaps we're not able to go to anymore. Then adjusting that, or being able to, I think, create a boundary, like Halima mentioned, is that can become really difficult, because spaces can be something that we sometimes depend upon, that we have a particular physical space for work, and we have a particular physical space for our home and our family. So I think the last thing, apart from that I wanted to talk about, that might be a change that you might have experienced due to the pandemic, is a sense of safety. Because of the fact that all of these decisions, these changes that you've had to deal with in terms of work, in terms of your social life, in terms of your family, or as well as your public life, has been about the fact that if I go to work, if you go meet someone, or if you go to a public space, what does that mean for your safety, physical safety? And I think that to have a sense of safety is something that we end up using as a springboard to be able to do our other activities, to be able to say that you're safe, and that you're going to be okay if you do something, is a big thing that we usually depend on. And not having that sense of safety, say go out to buy something, or to go out to meet someone, can be really difficult, and can make things really hard to adjust to, in a very intangible way, in that sense, to have a difference in dynamic in terms of how we view safety. So I think that must be a big change that people might have to adjust to, is not having always that sense of safety when we say go out somewhere, or when we say meet someone. And that's something that I wanted to sort of bring up. That sometimes perhaps changes in family structures can mean that you can also be in spaces that you might not feel safe for, or not, or if you're not able to interact with your family, or not be far away from your family for some people, that also might affect your sense of safety in that sense. I hope that's making sense until now.
Yes, it is.
All right. I think, Diksha, can you move to the next slide? I think we can.
Hi, Pratna. So these two comments that I thought were very good,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
both of them which came on YouTube. Shweta says that people who had house helps, who were doing the cleaning and cooking every day, that there was a lot
Yeah.
of under appreciation or or not appreciated, and now during the lockdown we know the value of the labor that they provided, which is a very interesting point I thought. And
absolutely.
yeah, Neetu also talks about how difficult it has been in this lockdown for field and outreach workers, and where there is a goal in mind where they wanted to achieve something, which is the safety of children, and that has obviously been compromised because you have to choose between your own safety and the safety of the child, which is, I think, a very interesting point that she made about yeah. So thank you
Yes,
so
I
much,
think.
Shweta and Neetu. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in this context, I feel like it's a very pertinent point to make is that when we're in a helping profession, which is a feeling I personally as well um, with my previous work experience, I definitely understand that when your entire work is about helping other people, especially someone as vulnerable as children, to not being able to help them, to feel restricted about that can really, really be very, very stressful. It must be really difficult for everyone to know that there was something that you must have had in mind to be able to help this child, that you must have had the capability to do before. And I think a lot of Childline's work has been that for so long, that not being able to do that must be a big change to also adjust to say, okay, now that there are all of these changes that are happening in different aspects of everyone's life, what does that mean for my capacity to change or to help anyone else? I think that's a really good point. Thank you.
So I'd just like to add here, it's not about not being able to help. It's also largely about you cannot help in the way that you used to help. So at every step, you have to think of alternatives. Yeah. So if it
Yeah.
is possible for you to reach somewhere in a particular time span, you know that there is no transport available, or say in the initial days, you know that mobility is affected.
Right.
You don't have a pass.
Absolutely.
So just to organize that entire thing so that you can reach the child and help, that itself has caused a lot of stress and anxiety and a lot of negotiation. So on one hand, while it's caused stress and anxiety, on the
Right.
other hand, I think it's helped us to pick up, to learn new skills.
Of course.
Forced
Right.
us
Right.
rather to learn new skills such as negotiating with various stakeholders who perhaps we never spoke to prior to this. We didn't need to.
That's true. Yeah, of course, of course. I definitely understand that. That does sound like it's such a negotiation that you then have to make of making decisions of what you can do in that particular situation and how do you get this done now. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great insight in that sense. Deepak shares that I agree. Thank you for sharing that, Deepak, on the chat. That sense of safety can cause stress and affect your lifestyle. Of course, definitely it can, and that stress can be really difficult to deal with for sure. And I think that ensuring the sense of safety to to the ones that you're helping as well can then become a difficult decision to make in that sense. And the very fact that you then have to make that decision, you have to take a step back and say, okay, what do I do? Can be incredibly stressful for everyone involved here. I'm sure that must be stressful for everyone involved here. All right. Can let's move to the next topic then. Thank you for sharing everyone your feelings and your challenges. I think it's been really helpful to sort of understand what changes you guys have might have been through in that sense. All right. So I think to a certain extent, the fact that you guys have talked about all of these changes and all of these adjustments that you've had to make, I think the reason that I wanted to talk about it is that literally dealing with any kind of change, whether it is a good kind of change or a bad kind of change, can cause stress because of, I think, the way that someone shared in the beginning, been used to dealing with something in a particular way all your life, or even for a really long time, and to have to then adjust to this change to say, okay, I can't do it the way that I used to, and now I have to find new ways of doing it, can be really difficult. It can take anyone in some time to sort of deal with that kind of change. And this is what we call transition induced stress. So, say, for example, if you're moving from one place to another, having to move to another city or to another geographical location can take you some time to adjust to it, and it can make life a bit stressful for a while. Um, and I think that a lot of you have shared what that means for you in adjust your work, as well as personally in terms of what kind of changes you've had to deal with. And I think that even if that is something that can be good for you or something that you chose to do, in that situation itself, it can be stressful. And now that we have had to deal with these changes out of a sense of necessity, out of a sense of crisis, that can be even more stressful. So it's additive to that sense is the fact that any kind of change in our lifestyle, in the way that we deal with something, can be a cause, can cause stress in itself. It's usually stress is usually a very normal consequence when you transition from one aspect, from you transition from one kind of way of living to another, transition induced stress. In that sense, with all of these changes that you've been going through. And to a certain extent, the reason that transition, any kind of transition can cause stress is because when you go through any kind of transition, when you have to change in any form, you have to figure out a new way of being, whether it is in with our families, whether it is with our work, whether it is even with ourselves. In that sense, if you have to figure out a new way to do it, and to find a new way, like Halima mentioned, to sort of negotiate and then understand what else to do in a particular situation, can take a lot of thought, can take a lot of time to take a step back and make the effort to then think about what alternatives are possible. And that can be a new way of us, of our thinking, can be a new way of feeling. And it can be really stressful in the beginning to then understand how to do that. So, to a certain extent, um, I feel like a useful way of thinking about it is I think of it as us living in a particular climate or a particular temperature. So if you're, say, in a very hot country like we are right now, and you suddenly have to move to a space that's really cold, that has snow, it is possible for you to live there. And it is possible that with time, we will be able to adjust to our climate. But it takes a while for us to do that. It takes a while for us to figure out the smaller moments of being able to adjust to a new climate. So, to a certain extent, in an emotional sense, that's what we're all doing. We're all used to living and adjusting emotionally in very, very specific ways. And now we have to adjust to a whole new way of living. And we are surviving that to a certain extent. We are dealing with it. And now we have to find new ways of doing that. I think I hope that example has been useful. Um, Another thing that we might have to deal with in terms of transition is that when you transition from one way of dealing with things or one way of life to another, there is always inevitably a loss. In that sense, is that when we adjust to something new, going from one old way to a new way, it means that you have lost something, means that there has been something that you don't have anymore. And that feeling can be really, really difficult to deal with. It can be that we have lost sometimes particular activities, as you have all shared, particular ways of interacting with each other. And all of these transitions can mean that the old way of doing things are something that we don't have anymore, and that can be really hard to sort of process in that sense. And to a certain extent, it is a kind of loss that we're dealing with to transition from anything. So even if there was no pandemic, even if you were just sort of moving from, say, one city to another, that's still dealing with the loss of not being in the old city anymore, not being in, say, with the example I used, not being in the old climate anymore. So I think that that loss can also bring up a lot of emotions and a lot of stress for us. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in this particular situation in terms of transition is that when we're transitioning from to a new way of being, to a new kind of life, like we have talked, like you have all talked about and shared experiences about, it can also cause a feeling of uncertainty in that sense. So, say for example, if we were if like we are changing from one way of being to another, I feel like trying to adjust to it, trying to understand it can bring up a lot of feeling of uncertainty. And uncertainty is basically being unsure of whether something is okay or not okay. So, say for example, if you have had to deal with this change of a social interaction, change of work, sometimes it can bring up a lot of uncertainty of whether you are doing the right thing or not. Is this enough? Am I capable of doing it? It can bring up a lot of questions internally for all of us about whether something is okay, whether something is healthy, whether something is good or whether something is bad. And it can be really hard to then really be sure of ourselves of whether what we're doing is definitely all right. And that feeling of uncertainty can really affect us as well. It can be hard to then go back to the space where we're okay with whatever is going on with us. So any kind of change can bring any kind of uncertainty. Um, so, like I said, with the example of living from an old climate to a new climate, if we did move to, say, a different climate, then that means that you don't know what's coming for you. You don't know what kind of challenges can come in living in that particular climate. And it can take a while for you to then really understand what to be prepared for. And that's to a certain extent what's happening here as well. What do we have to be prepared for? Do we have to prepare for not seeing anyone for a really long time? Do we have to prepare for being far away from everyone whenever we see them? We're not sure of what decisions to make here. And that uncertainty, that because it's also not just an individual uncertainty as much as we're also uncertain of where other people are in that particular situation. Is the other person that you're meeting or other climate that you're being, are they also dealing with it the same way as you, and should you follow them? So that is also not something that we have right now. So that uncertainty is on a collective level that we're experiencing right now, and dealing with that uncertainty can have an effect on our mental as well as our physical health in that sense, because it can cause a lot of stress. And I'm sure that in terms of your work as well, a lot of uncertainty can happen, because I'm sure that considering the range of work that you have and the kind of work that you've been doing, I'm sure that you all have particular ways in which you have known something to function. You've known that if you do something, this is going to be the result. And now it must be that you don't necessarily know if your actions are going to have the same consequences, or if the same action plan is going to have the same result. And that can cause uncertainty, that can cause differences in decision making, and that can be really, really stressful. And that can be really, really hard. But I think that to a certain extent, dealing with that uncertainty can also mean that it's really, really hard to really accept that uncertainty, to really accept the fact that you don't actually know what's going to happen, can also be really, really difficult. People can deal with that uncertainty in different ways. And sometimes there is also dismissal of that uncertainty to say, you can't really stay with that. So it's also really, really hard to stay with uncertainty and not knowing. I hope that's making sense. Yeah, thank you for sharing on the chat. I don't think there's a name, but yeah, I think that they've mentioned that a feeling of inertia, absolutely, that can happen with uncertainty, is that you can sort of not feel like, there can be feelings of helplessness to say that, oh, if we don't do anything, then let's, maybe we shouldn't do anything at all. Definitely. And I think that I wanted to ask everyone right now, considering all of the things that I've said about transition induced stress and about uncertainty, is that how is it that you feel when you think about this uncertainty? How is it that what is it that you're thinking about, or that you feel uncertain about? If you would like to share, please feel free to either unmute yourself or share on the chat, and we will try to sort of respond to it.
Pratna, one of the questions on YouTube
Yeah.
is that I think I'm going to paraphrase and say that when there are changes, we kind of resist it at first and not feel welcome,
Right.
and then slowly we are able to adapt to it. So why does something like this happen? And I'm going to add a little bit and saying what's the best way to deal with something like this that can cause.
Hello, Rashi. I think your audio has paused.
Yeah.
All right. I think I will answer that question. I think I've understood it. All right. So to a certain extent, it can be really difficult to deal with uncertainty, and sometimes, if we've sort of dealt with uncertainty, or we've dealt with something in a very particular way until now, and we suddenly have to change to that, we also take a while to adjust to it, mostly because that's kind of how our system works, in that when there are changes, change can sometimes feel really threatening to our system. And I'm saying this physically as well as mentally, is that any kind of change can feel like something is going wrong, right? And when something is going wrong, or when we are convinced, I suppose, that something is going wrong, then we can feel that we need to protect ourselves, and that we need to sort of do the things that we're doing in the way that we are, so that it doesn't change. And that's to a certain extent called resistance. We can have resistance to change, and we can have resistance to adjusting to anything, because of the fact that dealing with the uncertainty, or dealing with the change, is a process that you then have to do. You don't immediately adjust to something, right? And it can be a difficult process to start the very journey of adjusting to something new. And it's usually our first instinct as humans. It's quite normal as humans to sort of continue doing what we were doing before, as if nothing has happened. And it can take a while to even accept the fact that changes are happening and we must adjust to it. And it is because of, perhaps, my idea is that perhaps it is because of the way that we deal with any threat, is that when we conceive of something as threatening, as something that's difficult for us, then we can immediately try to sort of protect something. So that's, I hope that makes sense. Is that that's why I think is our initial instinct. If we look at it as threatening, if we look at it as something that we need to sort of protect ourselves from, we can then feel like we don't actually want to change anything. So I think because of the difficult feelings that accepting the change is going to bring, because of this process that is going to start once you accept it, it can be really hard to then suddenly adjust to it in that sense. Um, yeah, I hope, does that answer the question, Rashi?
Yes, Pratana. I got
Okay,
it.
thank you.
I
So,
think it does. Sorry.
yeah.
And there's one more question on chat
Mhm.
that talks about how we tend to maintain status quo and how difficult it is to get out of inertia.
Yeah.
And this new normal has taught us of things that are non-negotiable for ourselves and
Right.
changed our priorities, etc. So
Absolutely.
that can in itself can cause a lot of stress. So that I think that's a really good observation of also letting yourself know that this is a stressful time and everyone's going through stress, and just allowing yourself to feel that also, I think, is a great first step.
Absolutely. I agree with that. That it can be really, really just knowing that, acknowledging that can really, really be helpful in that sense. Is to first get to the point where you're able to accept that these changes are happening and that we must adjust to it, is something that can be, useful to do before we make any sort of changes, before we adjust to anything, for sure. And I think that another question that you had mentioned, Rashi, is that what is the best way to sort of deal with this, to deal with the stress, I think, that comes with being in a difficult situation, or being in changes, can be to, like you said, acknowledge and make space for it in that sense, make space for that uncertainty, work on sort of to try and work on accepting the fact that there are some things that we might have to change and might have to sort of accept, and that can be really, really difficult. And I think that the reason that I mentioned dealing with loss as well is that sometimes if we acknowledge the fact that we have lost some things that we had before as spaces of say support or spaces of understanding particular things, and we've lost those. I think that understanding that as a loss process, it has been really useful. I think in the context of mental health is that uncertainty and loss as two concepts that you're dealing with right now, not just in terms of loss of people, which of course has already also happened, but also as loss of particular spaces, particular things that you might have done. These things can be really useful. I think someone on the chat, Deepak, has mentioned that there are barriers in figuring new ways of being in the pandemic situation. Yes, absolutely. There are definitive barriers, and it can be difficult to do that. I think Chitrakala has mentioned that harmonizing adjustments between different time zones can be really hard. So I think that that's a good point to bring up, because it feels like adjusting cannot be an individual process. I think it becomes stressful also because of the fact that there are different people who have different ways of dealing with it, and adjusting to someone else's time zone, coordinating with them in terms of interaction can be really, really hard. That can also be stressful for everyone, surely, definitely.
There are two more questions. One has been about the lifestyle, right? The kind of life we had as children, where we would go out and play. I think Shweta was talking about wondering if our children will be able to do that at all. And another question by Ram Krishna is on how do you overcome uncertainty? I think that's a very important question. That we've been talking a lot about uncertainty and uncertain times, but how do we overcome that?
Okay. So the first question about children, I think, is a really important question to, I think, reflect on. Is that the way that we grew up in terms of social interacting with each other, making friends, or even being just children, in terms of exploring our environment, finding out new things to do, sort of tinkling with toys or tinkling with the outside world. Like, I don't know if I know someone who's going to even climb trees right now, which I used to do quite often when I was a child. And to a certain extent, I think children are the best examples in adapting to any kind of situation, because I think that although right now it might be possible that they might not socially interact outside as much as we used to, and I think to a certain extent, personally, I see that already happening. Is that social media has been a big space for interaction for people perhaps even younger than me. And I think to a certain extent, it's important to acknowledge that that's a public space in a way for social interaction now. And I think as far as I can see, children definitely do have that as a bigger role in their life in terms of socially interacting with new people, making friends, or even like sharing their experiences with their friends. I think that has become a big space, and it's going to become, as far as I understand, I think it is already more important. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for them to use social media as a space for that. I think that it has its advantages considering present circumstances. In terms of the second question of overcoming uncertainty, I do think that to a certain extent, the way that in which we can overcome uncertainty or overcome, I suppose, the stress around uncertainty is the fact that to a certain extent, it's really important to acknowledge the feeling of uncertainty so that you can share it with your community. And suppose I think that one of the biggest antidotes for uncertainty is community support, is to seek as well as give support to the people around you, to acknowledge and accept the fact that it's okay to feel this stressful about it, to support each other through it. I think that's a big way of definitely overcoming the feeling that comes with the difficulties that come with uncertainty. And to a certain extent, I think understanding what has changed for you, what are you feeling uncertain about, and what is it that we can do about it. I think that those three steps can be really useful. And I think that the coming webinars that we're doing with you is for that reason, is that there are different ways of dealing with that uncertainty and overcoming it, so that it doesn't necessarily have as much power over our decisions as it does right now. I think definitely it can look differently to different people. But as of now, I feel like supporting and talking about it to each other, really being cognizant and aware of it, and finding our own ways of expressing it can be really, really easy. People, you don't necessarily always have to do it with the community. You can share it through art or music. And I think expressing and understanding that uncertainty can be really useful. I hope that makes sense. Have there been any other questions, or would anyone like to share any feelings that are coming up when they're thinking about this much uncertainty? Please feel free to.
There are no questions for sure
Thanks,
on YouTube. Yeah.
All right. All right. So to a certain extent, I think that's kind of why we wanted to sort of bring up this question of why it's so hard to stay with the uncertainty and not knowing, because we tend to usually think of uncertainty as something that we have to overcome. We feel that uncertainty is unacceptable and is something that we shouldn't be feeling. So it's very, very natural for us to reject that feeling, to immediately to try and go to a space of certainty of something or the other. And it can be really hard to push yourself to a space of certainty if the world or your environment isn't allowing you some certainty. So to a certain extent, it's also really important when dealing with uncertainty to understand some of the aspects that might be coming from our situation or coming from our environment. It's important to then take a step back and understand how much responsibility can we take in this particular situation, and how much of our uncertainty is normal in that sense. So to a certain extent, taking that uh, thought process can also be really, really helpful, is that there is some uncertainty and vagueness that we sometimes do have to be comfortable with, that we do have to seek some acceptance towards, that there are some things that we might not be able to really say for sure. And that can be really difficult, because I think we are taught to be certain, we're taught that we should be sure of everything, that we should be certain of our future. The most like common question, perhaps interview question that we know of, is where do you see yourself in 5 years? And it can be really difficult and sometimes unacceptable for you to say I don't know, because you're expected to know, you're expected to sort of know for sure where you're going to be. And right now nobody's allowed to say where they're going to be in 5 years. That can be really hard. I think we're, to a certain extent, we're also taught to say that uncertainty is a bad thing. Uncertainty, if you're uncertain about something, it's not good. So to a certain extent, accepting some form of uncertainty can be useful. All right, shall we move on then, if there are no questions or any more comments?
Yeah, I think we should move on.
All right, so I think I will now go over the next part of this webinar to Deeksha, who will then talk about uh, other aspects of how this might impact us. Over to you, Deeksha.
Hi everyone. Is everyone able to hear me and see me properly?
Yeah, yeah.
Your audio is a bit
Yes, please
broken.
carry
Just
on.
a minute.
Just speak
Yeah.
a little more, little slowly.
I don't think I'm able to hear you. Just give me 1 second.
I don't know, my screen is hung.
Is everyone able to hear me and see me now? Hello?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I just had to, I had some internet issue. I'm just sharing the screen again. Okay, so far we've really gone over the kind of changes that we've been experiencing, and they have been drastic. We've had to adapt to completely new ways of looking at the world, engaging with different aspects of our life, whether it be work or home or in relationships or with friendships, and just in the way that we're functioning on a day-to-day basis. We've had to transition into a completely new way of life, which all of us are not used to at all, and it's absolutely new to all of us. And such changes are bound to have impacts on us, because if you look at it, we're on a constant state of stress. We're having to deal with one thing after the other. And such changes are likely to have mental health impacts. I'm wondering what kind of mental impacts everyone here has seen either come up for themselves or for people around them over the 8 month period of the lockdown and the pandemic.
So just looking at the comments, I feel like a lot of people have mentioned the word stress and mentioned the word discomfort with what's happening, just the adjustment. Someone has also mentioned that that they feel very uncomfortable with the lifestyle that is present right now, and that they're feeling very stressed, and has asked what can they do. So I think the word that is being very commonly used is the word stress.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we are able to verbalize, and that's what we are able to talk about.
Yeah. And that is the crux of everything that we've been going through, that there is so much stress, so much so that we're not even able to contextualize it to a point that it's everywhere. And hopefully, over the course of our discussion today, we'd be able to understand the stress a little bit better in deconstructing it. And looking at it that way. So let's, everything that everyone brought up is absolutely what we've been going through, and the kind of mental health impacts that the pandemic has had on us. Let's break them down a little bit now. Okay, so some of the impacts that we've seen, not just in India, but across the globe, has been on sleep. So, like we've been talking about, we're under so much stress, so much duress, and I mean, it really gets highlighted when how we can really, describe this is to say that we're really, really stressed. And at a time like that, when our environment is changing and everything around us is shifting, the one of the biggest impacts is on sleep, and our relationship with sleep. I mean, we are shifting from being able to get out of the house, perform other activities outside of the house, get things done that don't only involve four walls. And now we've shifted to a completely different normal, where what we see on a 24-hour basis is just the four walls around us and maybe our house, and at most get out and go to the terrace or the balcony, and very little actual very little in interaction with the outside world, and not near as much as what we're used to. And that definitely has an impact on sleep. And that is to say that sleep can be impacted in so many different ways, in not being able to sleep, or insomnia to an extent of, where in that heightened state of stress for so long, that it becomes difficult to fall asleep, or to be able to sleep at all for more than a very short period of time. And also in, if on the opposite end of the spectrum, being sleeping too much. It's another way in which we respond to stress. It affects our sleep cycle, and sometimes in not being able to deal with the amount of stress that's going on in our lives and around us, to just say, I'm going to switch off and I'm going to sleep for a long time. And apart from that, we're also sleeping at odd hours. There's no separation between work life, home life. There's no separation between anything like there was before. And so the sleep timings have also become weird. We sleep at odd hours. And even the kind of sleep that we're able to get is a lot more disturbed, maybe with nightmares or waking up at different points. The sleep becoming sensitive, etc., are some of the impacts that we see on sleep. And it's not just to say that this is specific to the pandemic and specific to what's been happening with the world right now, but also in general, when we're under a lot of stress and under a lot of duress, sleep is one of the things that gets quite immediately, impacted. And along with sleep is also appetite. I think how we've engaged with food, or how we have to engage with food now, has completely shifted. We're living again back in our house 24 hours. Maybe we have to cook meals, way more than we used to before. There's a lot of stress in, like someone mentioned, in also being able to get house help, in being able to get food delivered. There's just so much of stress around all of these areas, that appetite has already been something that's been difficult for us. And to add on to that, stress also has an impact on appetite. To say that we either feel like overeating or binge eating to cope with the stress. It's oftentimes a way in which we used to just deal with all of this like deluge of stress and information that we're currently facing, to eat a lot or to completely lose appetite and not be able to eat. Or eating things that are not particularly good for our body, or not particularly healthy, and not really being able to look at what is actually good for us. And in those ways, like two very, very instrumental parts of our everyday life, like sleep and appetite, get pretty impacted with stress. And that's something we're seeing happen quite globally now. On when something like when basic aspects of our life, like sleep and appetite, get affected, and our general state of being is also being in a lot of anxiety, being under a lot of stress, having to deal with all of this transition related stress, and to deal with all of these changes that are happening around us. And the fact that a lot of things are also happening, a lot of other things are also happening across the globe that can cause stress, is its impact on how we feel on a daily basis, and how our moods are on a daily basis. The pandemic has really impacted mood levels, and there have been a lot more, a higher incidence of depression over the past 7 months. And it's to say that we're under so much stress that and everything about the way we live has changed, that how we interact with ourselves and how we exist also has been affected at this point, and we're globally facing a point in time where we're all experiencing low mood dips. And yeah, our mood is definitely being affected at a time like this. Um, on top of that, we're also having to be extremely hyper vigilant right now. And hypervigilance is nothing but increased alertness. So we're having to be extremely alert right now. We have to wash our hands so many times, wear masks when we step out of the house, constantly sanitize, keep social distance, have to keep in mind, if someone is too close to you, or keep in mind where they've been, or just the amount of sanitization that you have to do, all of that, and all of the information about the virus that exists online and everywhere, is that need for us to be constantly alert, and that is not something that's very comfortable to sit with. Having to be on high alert 24/7 about everything, that can have a huge impact on how we're even able to process things, or how we're able to live our lives, that you're not able to focus on other aspects of your life that you would like to focus on, or you would have rather focused on if all of these things did not exist, and have to be hyper vigilant and on your toes all the time. Another impact has been on emotional regulation. So we've been talking about how sleep has been affected, appetite has been affected, the mood has been affected, and we've had to be so alert and hyper vigilant through this time. And we've also been having to deal with so much news. Every time I turn on the TV, or I go on the internet, there's something new that sparks fear, that sparks anxiety, that sparks anger. And we previously we had ways in which we could deal with these emotions, the extensive emotions that would come up. We had ways in which we could deal with them. We could step out, we could meet people who are close to us. We could go and do so many things that we're not able to do right now. And having other aspects of our lives like sleep and appetite also being affected, emotional regulation becomes a problem, where we're not able to regulate these emotions. There are sudden bursts of anger, sudden bursts of anxiety, and or like just sudden spaces where you're also very afraid. And these are not things we're able to regulate because of the amount of stress that's on us right now, and the amount of changes that we've had to comprehend all in one go. And anxiety has also been like one of the most significant things that has come up, a mental health impact that has come up over the pandemic. And stress and anxiety are very, very closely related. That we feel constantly nervous, worried, and I think someone mentioned that there's the state of unease that we're at, and anxiety, holds all of those things. That when there is a lot of stress, and when we're extremely overwhelmed with having to deal with so many things, that there is a constant feeling of nervousness and just unease and unrest that we're having to sit with. And it's globally been an increase that we're seeing in anxiety levels because of the state of the world right now. And going along with all of these other mental health impacts is existential angst. And we are having to deal with so much life and death, and so many drastic changes. It's not simple that we've had to shift our entire lives from being able to see each other face to face, being able to do activities, being able to, just get things done, even to buy groceries. Even that has completely changed. We have to think about it. We have to plan around it, and that means everything around us is changing, and that makes space for us it makes space for us to be existential and feel an existential shift right now. We are not being able to all of the meaning that we've had so far in our life, all of the meaning that we've made in our lives, whether like the meaning of just being able to get up and get ready and go to work, that has shifted, and it has made us question the meaning of things now and how they function. A lot of people have been mentioning that we this sense of uncertainty gets us questioning about the future of our children, the future of our own lives, the future of the planet, and all of these things are existential in nature because we're facing such a dire shift in how we function as a society. And also, we've lost access to so many safe spaces. And these safe spaces also have had so much meaning for us. It has been, the way in which we cope with things, the way, just as small additions to our routine to make the day better, to make our life better. And over the course of this lockdown and the pandemic, we've lost access to these safe spaces. And that means we've also lost access to these specific areas that would give us safety. We've lost access to safety in a sense, and that's extremely terrifying, and that shakes us to another level as well. And not being able to talk to people, be able to meet people, I think we've also been conditioned to look at socialization and talking, friendships as something that we do over a meal or face to face, where we're actually next to each other, and we're actually able to be there for each other and do things for each other. And that has definitely shifted, and this lack for us as social beings has had an impact on its own for how we're able to interact with other people now, or even the question as to how am I going to keep my friendships going, or how am I going to establish new friendships. All of these are very heavy questions that we've had to deal with, and they go to say that that our mental health has been impacted on so many layers and so many levels. I hope all of this has made sense to everyone here.
Diksha, given the number of people who have joined from Tamil Nadu, I think we need to also talk about the fact that you can answer questions in Tamil. So if anyone wants to have a conversation or wants to ask a question in Tamil, they are you are happy to answer them in their language as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think Harleen, ma'am, on the chat also has raised an important point about the pretense that we put up of being fine, especially because there are people who are dependent on us, and it almost feels like playing a role. She's called it constant role playing, takes a toll, and I can imagine that space to remain vulnerable or the space to be yourself is diminishing slowly by slowly because everyone's got their own thing to deal with, and you don't want to pile on your friends, you don't want to be a burden on other people, and everyone's just silently walking around dealing with stuff, and that's why, and yet nobody's talking about it because we don't want to seem like a burden. I think that's a very important point to make, and that's also an important point that talks about the need for community support.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an important point. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that brings a new arena of things that we've had to deal with in how to engage with people and engage with people around us. When we know that they're all going through the same things that we are, that there's so much stress in their lives as well, and to be able to actually know where it's okay for you to talk to people, or where it's okay for you to reach out to people, that's a really hard line for us to draw. And that itself has its own mental health impacts. I mean, it again puts you, I think this it brings me back to the same kind of anxiety and hyper vigilance that we've had to engage with right now, in not being able to in needing to actually constantly think about other people as well, and how they'd be feeling, and the kind of difficulties that brings in relationships.
Absolutely. I think that if anyone else has a question or a comment, please let us know. We have great representation from team members for this webinar. We have people from Kerala, from Shillong. I can see a lot of people from Tamil Nadu, from Andhra Pradesh. So please feel free to talk to us about your experiences during this lockdown. What is it that you have been able to deal with? What are you struggling with? The webinar is for you, is to deal with your anxieties, to deal with your emotions. So please feel free to let us know.
Are there any more questions for
There is a question on
or do I
the
move
chat.
on?
Yeah, on the Zoom chat, if you could take that.
I'm not able to view the chat because I'm also presenting. Could someone
I can read it out to you.
what it is? Yeah.
So the comment is that there is a huge issue, like the trust is the greatest thing that leads to lack of trust, I'm assuming, leading people to stress. So there is like employer versus employee, parents versus children, and so on. Either not having trust or breaking the trust that was there. So what would you advise for this?
Rashi, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I think you broke for me. I wasn't able to hear a part of it.
No problem. So basically, the person is talking about the impact of lack of trust or breaking the trust, and everything seems to be a competition in terms of employer versus employee, parent versus teacher, a parent versus child. So there seems to be a tug of war, and that's what's leading to a great sense of sense of stress. So what do you have to say for that? If I can just talk a little bit about it, I think that this situation is stressful for everybody. Whether you're a student, whether you are somebody who's working, whether you're a parent, whether you're an employer or an employee, everyone has different stresses. The point is that recognizing that all of us are going through something collectively, having a little bit of empathy to understand what the other person's going through, or just believing them when they say that they are having a difficult time. I think we're constantly want people to look at how bad things are for us. We're forgetting to look at how bad things might be for them as well. So having empathy for each other is, I think, the greatest thing that we can do in this very, very difficult time. And for me, I would say that systems need to evolve. So if there is a tussle between the employer and the employee, it needs to be resolved at an institutional or a system sense rather than putting the onus on just the employer or the employee. So I think that for me is a great takeaway. If either one of you want to add something to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been put in a situation where we don't know how to deal with these new things now, from the kind of life we have to live now. And it's completely understandable that these things come up for us. But like you said, Rashi, I think the one way for us to really move forward is in being able to recognize that things this is something that's happening globally, and it's something that's happening to our family members and our friends as well. And to be able to both look at yourself and look at what they're going through and hold space for both of those things, with empathy and with openness, can be one way in which we can really deal with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that although I do agree with Deeksha that the point about empathy can be really, really useful in this particular situation, because it can be hard to trust people, can be hard to understand how to respond to a particular situation, considering that there is so much change that we're going through. And to a certain extent, having empathy, developing empathy is a skill. It's not something that sometimes comes naturally to us. And we develop empathy for the other person by trying to understand where they're coming from. The most useful thing that can happen in that sense is developing our ideas, or improving on our communication. That's I think something that as a concept can be really useful, is how do we then communicate with this person if we're having trouble with them, or if we're having some sort of difficulty in trusting them in that sense. So I think that is something that can be really, really useful, is working on clear, empathetic, but very, very useful communication that's most effective. And it can be a skill that can be developed, is what I think I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that both of these are great points. Shweta has a very important question to ask in on YouTube. She's asking that, the frustration levels of people are so high that right now it feels like people have lost all fear of the pandemic and have started roaming out. So is this also due to the anxiety that they must be facing?
I mean, we have been on a constant state of anxiety. I think that's something that's really that we've really spoken about during the course of this webinar. Is to say that we're constantly stressed and we're in a constant state of anxiety. And I suppose at some point people do want to break away from that stress and say that I don't want to deal with it. And that could most definitely lead to us just saying that, I don't want to deal with the pandemic, I don't want to deal with the effects, and I just want to go back to normal. That we're having the same resistance that we've been talking about, that it's so hard for us to adapt to this change, that we'd rather, just switch back, and almost like forget that this is happening and move on with our lives the way we're used to and the way we know how to.
Again, I want to stress the importance of community at this point, because it is very natural to feel frustrated. It's very natural to feel like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to follow the rules anymore because it's just too overwhelming. How, like we spoke about in the beginning, that uncertainty and change can bring about a lot of anxiety, and we are constantly changing. Uh, there was lockdown, then there was lockdown, unlock, then again lockdown. Cases in different parts of the cities are going up, so there's also a lot of discrepancy of information. And in a country like ours, there will be those many roadblocks to kind of deal with information. So being constantly hyper vigilant also has a huge, it takes away a lot of our energy. So we don't make the best decisions when we are low on energy. So when you are being hyper vigilant and when you are tired, you need to let somebody else make the decision. Let your family members decide whether it's safe to go out or not. Don't take decisions on the spur of the moment. Don't say I am going out and I don't care about what is going to happen. If corona has to happen, it will happen. That's not the attitude with which we can deal with this pandemic. It's also important to recognize that this is tiring. Many times in the day when I'll be like, I am so tired today, but I don't feel like I have done any work. You have to realize that you're working in a pandemic. You're not working despite a pandemic. So the pandemic is going to have a huge impact on the resources, on your mental ability, on your decision making ability. All of these things are going to be impacted, and we need to rely on each other. The other, obviously, you can always reach out to All Story for counseling, for support, and we'll be more than happy to provide you with those services. So please remember that, like I said in the beginning, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to remember to do things for yourself that can replenish your energies.
So I'd like to just come in here, please.
Yeah.
Harleen, I'd just like to come in here. This is with
Yes, Harleen
reference,
ma'am, please go ahead.
with reference to a question that I see in chat regarding loss of trust or of trust being broken. I want to understand this a little more. I mean, is it because we are in uncertain times that start questioning everything, or is it that because there's a negative atmosphere around us, so we sometimes perceive the negative in a trusted relationship as well? We think that they have broken our trust, or we imagine that they do not trust us. Uh, what is this exactly? I want little more clarity regarding.
Ma'am, I think I can give the example which I saw in my family. Like nowadays, the online classes are going on, and one of my brother is watching online classes. But the parent came and said, "Don't play games. You are always playing the game." He might have already done it, but now he's actually at the class. He didn't reply anything. He's looking at me and didn't utter any word, but his eyes are telling me I am honest to my classes, but see what my parents are thinking about me. I am playing game. That the eye contact is very strong, which I felt. And my other brothers who are working in IT sector, morning, afternoon, evening, three times they have calls, and they were keep asking, which has not happened before the lockdown situation have been conducted. So these kind of examples which I'm observing, I understood what is lacking in this, why this is happening. So wanted to point out that here.
So, sorry, Pratna Diksha, if I can come in here and respond to just the example part of it. I think that what we define as a lack of trust is just people, what we call as displacement, or what we call as just, finding the easiest person to blame. So, I think that instead of lack of trust, I would say there is a lack of communication in this case, and everyone doesn't know the stress that the other person is going through. So if the parents were to, and this in this case, it will have to be the parents who initiate this conversation, because we can't put the responsibility on a child or a teenager. So parents need to have that empathy, need to cultivate that empathy in the child, to understand that the parents are also stressed because the lockdown is not easy for them, and they need to communicate like very openly about the fact about what is playtime, what is study time, and the fact that even in this time concentration at the level of the child might be not ideal because they are also going through stress. I like we've been mentioning that in every case I don't think it's trust, but it's more of lack of empathy. We don't understand what the other person is going through, and if we were to just have that conversation with each other, I think it would be much better. Harleen ma'am, does that kind of answer the query or the question that you had about lack of trust?
I can't hear, ma'am. Can anyone else hear?
No, I haven't heard anything from her.
Okay.
She's dropped off.
Okay, so then we can continue, and when ma'am comes in, we can reconvene about this.
Okay. I think I wanted to add on to what you were saying, and I'm wondering if I can do that when Harleen ma'am is back, or do I just go ahead with that now?
I think you should go ahead with the thought, because then we can get it all in one place.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just thinking that the kind of analogy that comes to my head is, even with engaging with our children right now, things are different. It's like we've been talking about a new normal that we're headed towards, and it's almost like we don't have ground right now, that we don't know what's really happening, and it's almost like we're floating up in air. And when we don't know what's happening, this idea of trust that keeps coming up becomes a point of concern. You don't know, when you don't know what is ground, you don't know what you can trust, what you cannot trust, what trust even means at this point. And I think the idea of being able to, ground ourselves is really important, and that comes with communication, that comes with empathy, that comes with knowing what everybody else around us is going through, to collectively create that ground, to collectively be able to lay that foundations for ourselves. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, because why I wanted to raise this question means in Tamil Nadu, I heard a news from television saying parents denied to provide a mobile phone to attend online classes. The child committed suicide. For the people, those who think, oh, just a mobile or just stress, that may be a normal, but for the child, it is life. Because the child and parents doesn't have, as you said, the communication gap, one life is gone. And it was experienced in my family itself. My brother is asking me, Akka, I want a mobile. My father is telling, no, he is only, why you want to provide a mobile? He is a first rank holder, no need, let him go to school and then learn. So it is just a startup, right? So if this is increased, and the child might have taken, my brother might have taken some serious decision also, as we were discussing earlier. So in that context, I wanted to understand this.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're that lack of communication is something that's coming up, because we're having to deal with our own stressors, even with parents and kids, to be able to have those conversations as to why it is important to have mobile phones, or why we need to make a little bit of a shift in how we're moving forward with life. I think what we keep coming back down to is the fact that we're dealing with a new normal right now, and complete change, and being able to talk about it to each other, and know what the other person wants and needs, and being able to empathize with them is just the main thing that we need to do in order to be able to trust more, or be able to move forward from this.
Yeah.
I think adding to that, I just wanted to say that I'm really sorry to hear that, and thank you for sharing that particular experience to us. I feel like sometimes in these particular situations, we may have a very specific idea, especially when it comes to in dynamics between parents and children, or employers versus employees. It might be sometimes very difficult when we have a very specific idea of what someone is supposed to be doing, and when that's not happening, when someone else is adjusting, it can be really difficult to understand why something is not happening. So if this child is not studying, or if parents are frustrated that the school performance of the child is getting impacted, that can be really difficult without that communication to understand why it's not happening. They can they can be an idea of trying to impose a very specific way of saying that this has to happen. And to develop an sense of empathy, to develop communication, would then be to understand why it's not happening, or to communicate with the child as to what is expected and what is actually possible. I hope that also makes sense, in that sense that when we say that we want to help in developing empathy, or we want, to help in acknowledging the uncertainty, these things help in then communicating or talking to people around us as to what difficulties we might be going through, or they might be going through, when we expect something of them. So I feel like, to a certain extent, that can be really useful in these kind of dynamics, is to then ask to develop that communication so that breaks don't happen. I hope that's making sense. To sort of adjust to this new environment, to this new normal, can then mean that we might be more accepting of other people trying to adjust as well. That's our hope. In terms of the impact, is that it then helps in our social interactions, in the way that we talk to other people about their experiences as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Prasna. Yeah, but that is, that's really, really important for us in moving forward now. Are there
Sorry.
any more?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Diksha, sorry to just come in. I want to also say that, like they say, Rome is not built in a day, neither is trust, and neither is the ability to talk to children. And y'all are the best at understanding that, thinking of children as complex beings, and they have their own emotions, they have their own space, and we often don't give enough credit to children for having these emotions. So it's very important, and we are going to do these trainings further on talking to children. We are also going to deal with suicidal ideation. We're going to talk about what suicide means. So I hope that a lot of these questions will come in handy then as well. And we can't obviously address everything in a webinar. So those trainings, I bet, will help all of you in how to have these difficult conversations. If you can't buy a mobile, or if you can't give certain luxuries to your children, which they are seeing their friends do, how to have those difficult conversations, how to have age appropriate conversations about these difficult matters, how to talk to them about what we can afford, why we can't afford it. All of that will be a part of the training, and I'm so glad to see these questions, because that means that the answers have to be found for that through the training. So thank you so much for sharing with us, and talking about something so personal. I know that it's very difficult to do that in a group like this, so thank you so much.
Okay. Are there any more questions, or shall we move on to the next part? Okay. We'll move on to the we'll move on to the next part. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about coping strategies now, and I'm wondering what coping means to everyone here. What do you understand by the term coping? Or maybe you could even give us some insights on the kind of coping strategies that you've been using to deal with several different kinds of stressors.
one coping strategy that I use every day is to take it one day at a time.
That's an absolutely like important coping strategy for us to hold as well, in taking it slow and being able to tell ourselves that we can take it one day at a time and that it's going to be okay. That's a very important coping strategy. Thank you for sharing. Are there any more insights on coping and the kind of coping strategies that we use? Okay, so I'll just move on to kind of giving everyone an idea of what we're going to talk about over here. So, in essence, coping is nothing more than just trying to gain a sense of control over what's happening around us. To go back to the metaphor that I was using, it's like we don't have ground right now and we're kind of floating in air. And coping is something that helps us gain control over all of this and find that grounding, and to be able to comfort ourselves at a point like this. Coping can look different for different people. What I use to cope need not be something that you do, or it might be something that's absolutely alien to you, and vice versa. So I think the idea of coping itself is so vast. There's a huge array for us to borrow from, and it can be very specific to each person. Also, coping can be something that's good or bad for us. I think over the course of this discussion, we've also spoken about that in terms of how coping in trying to cope, we might be doing things that are also unhealthy for us, and we might also be trying to cope using techniques that are not particularly working or things that are not particularly helping us at the moment. And so it's an important point for us to discuss in how do we cope and how do we cope healthily? What are the coping strategies that we could use to deal with the pandemic right now and all of the associated stress and the mental health impacts? So continuing, where we left off and what we've been talking about, which is social support. So social support has always been a very important aspect of human society. We are social beings. And I think Ratna even mentioned that we, especially in India, we are community based. Our culture relies so much on community, relies so much on communication and socializing, and we for us as Indians, and in an Indian society, it's all, social support and social interaction is so much more important, or it's just extremely important. And I think there's been a lot of research as well in the field of psychology to say that social support is really important for mental health. So in dealing with the stressors that are coming in with anxiety, and all of the be not being able to sleep, change in appetite, change in how we're interacting with the world, one major factor is in seeking social support, and it kind of brings us back to the discussion that we've been having so far on communication, in being able to reach out to each other and being able to ground each other, empathize with each other, and connect with each other. The pandemic has also shaken up how we connect with each other. that we're not able to engage and connect like we used to before. And so it's really important for us to try to find out what connection means right now and how we can move forward from there, in really understanding each other and being able to be there for each other. Social support can look, different for different people. Like we've been talking about, some people would not, would not want to meet at a time like this, but doing video calls or Zoom calls or whatever to keep in touch with people that you care about, or in engaging with your family in specific ways, in being able to talk to them about things that are going on, and being able to have some family time, or to also have some time with your friends or your partners, being able to connect and understand what they're going through right now, where they stand right now, and in also being able to communicate where you do as well, and in that space of mutual communication, in being able to support each other. Even at work, it can be really helpful to um, gain some social support, in being able to reach out to colleagues who you are close to and have a relationship with, and being able to support each other through this, on the mutual experience that everyone is having during the pandemic, especially in the work environment. All of you here are going through similar things together, and to be able to reach out to each other and being able to hold space for each other can be really important during times like this, to help us cope and help us find that grounding. Connection is so important for us to be able to see the world through so many different perspectives and understand this new normal, and be able to safely find some grounding and move forward. And for that, we really, really need to look at social support. If you're also, other areas of social support can include, going for support groups or going for group meetings on various different topics, or being able to have like group Zoom calls with your friends or people who are close to you, and yeah, other aspects like this where you can socialize, but also at this point socialize safely, and be able to really connect while you do this. In getting social support, we're not just looking at interacting with people more, but actually connecting with them, empathizing with them, and being able to mutually be there for each other. Another aspect that can really help us cope is therapy. So I think we've also spoken a lot about how the aspect of safety has changed us so much, and that's something that's also been taken away on many regards. And therapy is the space that can offer that kind of safety and being able to provide that safety. The therapist should provide a safe space where you can talk over what you need to, and talk over the kind of stress and mental health impacts that you've had, and have someone who's actually able to be there and empathize and connect with you. And over that, the therapist can also help, design specific coping strategies that you can use for yourself in your life. We all cope differently, and we're all also unique as human beings. And sometimes it might be important to look at unique ways in which you can cope with your life, that might be different from everyone else. And therapy is something that can also, help you with that, help you understand coping better, and help you understand how you can cope better. Another important aspect that can help us cope is, laying boundaries in different areas of our lives. And in being able to lay boundaries, that is to say that we're under so much overwhelm, where every aspect of our life is kind of colliding into each other, and we're not able to separate them. And in laying boundaries, we are trying to make that separation between us and different aspects of our lives, and also in how we engage with them. Boundaries at home can look like, having placing a particular time where you engage with your family, a specific time where you do specific activities at home, time when time outs for when you're also placing time outs for yourself, in being able to relax, and also in being able to focus on self-care, laying that boundary for yourself as to what is too much for you at home, and where do you need to maybe take a step back to care for yourself, and to focus on yourself at this point. It's really important that we're able to place these boundaries at home and these boundaries with ourselves, in also being able to affirm what we're going through, understanding what we're going through, and also being able to say that you're there for yourself, and these emotions and everything that comes with are something that we understand, and we're able to move forward from. So in all of these ways, we can place boundaries at home, in how we engage with ourselves and people around us at home. If you are living alone at home, it might be even more important to place these boundaries for yourself, in being able to understand when times when you would need to connect, and being able to listen to your body when and mind when it says that you need some time to connect with people, and giving that as well. Similarly, we also need to lay boundaries at work. In like we've mentioned, work and home and everything is sort of just collided into the same space, and we're working into late hours of the night. We're working through lunch breaks. We're working through so many aspects, and all of these are sort of colliding into each other. It's also important for us to lay boundaries over here, in being able to maybe chart out a schedule for yourself for work, and that gives you ample amounts of break, in being able to assert yourself at work, and communicate what you need at this point, and communicate, and being able to also give space for other people to communicate what they need, in being able to also divide the amount of workload among people based on what you can actually do, and more than anything else, being able to separate to a certain extent this aspect of your life your from other aspects of your life, from home and your children, and not doing them all at the same time, to have them sort of merge into each other. And similarly, also in how we engage with news, I think we are facing such a delusion information. We're constantly looking at our phones. If you turn on the TV, there's always something or the other that sparks anxiety, that sparks fear, that sparks discomfort. And it's important for us to also be able to disengage from the news, being able to lay boundaries over there, to say that there would be a certain time of the day where you would probably not engage with the news or engage with the world, even taking social media breaks, or taking breaks from information hubs, where you just give yourself time to just be, and not have to constantly deal with an overflow of news. Similarly, and also being able to do soothing activities, where again, soothing looks different for different people. But in trying to understand what soothing means for you, for some people, soothing could be in doing art, and doing art, or painting, or sketching, or doing some kind of craft. For other people, it can be in journaling or reading a book. It can also be in having long warm showers, or having an evening break with a cup of tea, and someone to talk to at that time. So in different ways, we understand soothing in different ways, and it's important for us to also look at soothing activities that we can use at a time like this, to comfort ourselves and to ground ourselves, in order to be able to cope with all of this stress. When we do, I mean, like we've talked about, we're also on this constant state of heightened state of being. We're anxious, we're hyper vigilant, we're stressed out. So it's important for us to engage in soothing activities to cope, in doing things that comfort you and doing things that provide some amount of calmness and safety. Over the course of the upcoming webinars, we're going to be talking about coping in a lot more detail, in trying to understand coping in a lot more detail and looking more at more activities that you can do to cope with the kind of stressors that we're dealing with right now. I hope this is making sense.
Another thing that I think I wanted to add when you were talking about boundaries, Diksha, that I was just thinking about was the fact that when we're talking about communication and we're talking about boundaries and we're talking about all of the difficulties that we've had in social interaction or new interactions with each other, considering this context, is that boundaries can also be emotional. Boundaries as a concept can also be applied to the idea of having. Can you hear me now? Somebody on the chat has said that they can't hear me. Are you able to hear me?
I'm able to hear you.
All right.
I'm able to hear you. I don't know.
All right.
I can hear you. Please
Yeah.
carry on.
All right. So I was just saying that boundaries can also be emotional, which is the idea that you can take care of your own feelings before you try to take care of someone else's. Like Rashi has mentioned, that you can't pour from an empty cup, which kind of means that you do have to draw a boundary between what you are going through and what you are feeling versus what other people are going through. And we're going to be talking a lot more about this in the coming webinars that we're going to be doing with you as well. Is the idea of how do we try to understand how to take care of ourselves while how to take care of other people. And this is quite pertinent considering the range of work that you guys do and the kind of work that you're doing, which is a lot of caregiving. So to a certain extent, the idea of using boundaries as a useful way of taking care of ourselves is also really important to understand in the context of emotions, is that we need to take care of our own feelings as well when we're trying to understand how to help or how to take care of someone else. So boundaries can also look emotional in that sense of trying to draw a boundary between how we're feeling versus how someone else is making us feel and how they're feeling something. I just wanted to bring that up, and we'll have a deeper conversation about that later on. But I think in terms of the context of boundaries, I just wanted to say that here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pratna, for bringing that up. It's really important for us to be able to make that distinction for ourselves, and to be able to draw those boundaries for ourselves in all of these areas. Does anyone have any questions on?
Yeah, I would like to share one of my personal experiences that I have in my life. I'm a news lover and I'm very fond of watching news. I'm be with some of the international news channels that you have, but with the inception of this pandemic situation, and when I was there with my earlier activities of watching news and all, so there while hearing about like the specs with regard to higher increases in the number of pandemic cases and all, so they were having an adverse impact on me in terms of enhancing the level of stress that I was having. So I started adopting a strategy when I was doing a where I was creating a boundary between me and some of the news channels that I used to watch. So adversely, I am not updated about like the present situation which is happening in terms of pandemic situation. This is a fact. But time and again, I think like I have been benefited in terms of like decreasing the kind of stress that I was having after hearing about like the higher increases that are happening in terms of COVID-19 situation, in the cases relating to COVID-19 situations. So I don't know whether this is right or wrong, but it has happened with me, ma'am.
If I heard you right, you were saying that there were certain aspects that you have disengaged from certain news channels and certain aspects that
Yeah,
give you
and yeah,
major.
like the creating a isolation between like from like getting isolated from some of the news channels, and that too on a regular basis. Like it's something that has helped me in getting down, like in coping some of the stress that I was facing while listening to those news channels, especially with regard to the figures that they used to like depict, like with regard to the rate of increase of COVID-19 and all. So this was having an adverse effect on me in terms of my stress level. And I was also in a state of sleeplessness, and then I started adopting this strategy of just isolating me from such newses and all. So then I started feeling a bit better, and this has happened with me. So this is a strategy which has worked with me, and I'm still following it. Yeah.
Consciously staying away from news.
Not constantly, ma'am, but maybe like,
Consciously, consciously
yeah, ma'am, yeah.
staying away.
So that I perceive as a boundary that I've created between me and news channels, and this is a strategy which has worked with me.
Absolutely. I think this is a fantastic example of, recognizing that something is not working out, something that was pleasurable in the past, something that you considered as a recreational activity in the past, in this new normal not working out for you, and changing it to find something that does. I think this is a fantastic example of understanding what your boundaries are and moving on. So while appreciating the fact that I might still need to consume some amount of news to be able to be more careful about my own health, what kind of news channels do I consume, what kind of papers do I read, or not reading them at all, asking somebody else to give me the news, or relying on reading only one article a day. All of these are great examples of how to set boundaries and how to recognize that in this new normal, things that worked for you in the past may not work for you anymore. Thank you so much for sharing this. This is a fantastic example. Pratna, Diksha, do you have anything to say?
May I add something,
Just that
please? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's especially important to recognize that when it comes to a physical health problem and we have to give up on something or stay away from something, we find it easier as human beings to rationalize that. So if you have a sugar problem and you're diabetic, you may be very tempted, but you will go off sugar because you know that might kill you. But when it's a mental health problem, it's something, or not a problem, but when it's something which is causing you stress emotionally or mentally, it's very difficult for us to take this call, to make that distinction and say, okay, this is not, I'm not doing well with this. So I need to separate myself from this for now.
That's absolutely true. And it's so important for us to be able to understand it from that perspective as well, that we're able to make these changes for ourselves when it comes to our physical health. But now, what the new normal requires us to make these changes for ourselves, for our mental health, in being able to recognize that you need to do these things to cope with the stress and to be able to handle all of these things that have happened with the pandemic. Thank you so much for sharing. It's an extremely important point.
Hello, I
Yeah.
Nirish from CKH. I would also like to share some of our experience, because when we are talking with our colleague in CHILDLINE India Foundation and also with the partner organizations, many a times I hear, and I also experience that like physical symptoms, kind of a stress that we never experienced before, even when we had a very hectic workload to handle before, when the situation was normal. But I have been hearing from my colleagues that they're feeling kind of a headache, body pains, and kind of if they had some kind of a blood pressure problem, the blood pressure is going up. So many kind of, and they don't get enough sleep, or they don't get kind of a good sleep during night. So many things are being shared between us, and we also feel that this is all because of the stress that we go through due to the COVID situation. And I also like to appreciate the Disha and the team for giving some of the tips, like social support, soothing activities. It will help a lot, I think so. I know some of my colleagues are, they're staying alone in a rented accommodation, and they have to look after themselves. So besides work, they have to look after to their personal things like cooking food and things like that. But when people are held up in many activities, people, they lose time, or they don't have enough time to cook food, and we can't order also Swiggy or any kind of a service also is very limited. So nutrition part also, some of our staff is getting, they're getting neglected on their food and nutrition. So in order to address this present scenario, the stress, I think this to have nutritious food also, I think is an a remedy, or maybe a therapy maybe. And getting good sleep, another remedy, or another soothing activities. It depends, and it varies from individual to individual. One may work better for me, may not work for the one. The same may not work good for the others also. But knowing that where is your, where your interest is, that kind of activity you should practice. What I do, like I also get kind of, I never experienced body pain and headache before. But nowadays I'm getting kind of a headache, even when I'm doing nothing, I'm getting kind of a tiredness and lethargic feeling. So what I try to do, listen to music. I have a good stream, a clear stream, or a river nearby. I go for swimming in the evening, which keeps me and kind of a exercise also, to be physically active. Some kind of those tips are very effective while Disha was taking the classes. I think there are a lot to research out, and there is a lot yet to come, because the uncertainty is uncertainty. We don't know what it is. And I thank the team from Alternative Story for giving us some simple tips to handle our day-to-day stresses. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing about your and giving us some examples of the coping strategies that you have been using over this time. I think it's very important to also address that physical symptoms are something that we're also seeing a lot now in terms of physical symptoms of mental health, how anxiety and stress manifested as headaches or tightness in the body, or some amount of just pain across different areas of our body, tightness of breath or sweating, and all of these things are these physical manifestations are to say that we are actually under a lot of stress and mental duress, and it becomes more and more important for us to cope in being able to ground ourselves and being able to soothe ourselves at a time like this, when you do get a headache, to realize that there is a lot of anxiety and stress right now, and to get a break from what you've been doing, and to be able to get out and exercise, and also relax the tensions in our body. It's really, really important. I think over the course of the next couple webinars that we've been talking about, we'll go a lot more over what coping can look like, and more strategies of what we can do to cope with the stressors that are coming up for us.
So a lot of comments on YouTube about the fact that they found the session to be useful. So I'm very glad, and I want to thank all of you for being so patient and hearing and sharing so much about your own lives with a group. And I know that for a lot of you, this is the first, or maybe you attended the last session. So maybe this is the second time that you're seeing us. But we hope that we'll be continuing to talk to you all much more. We're doing the webinar next in Hindi and then in Kannada. So we are looking forward to having this conversation with your colleagues, with everyone else. And we hope to see you all again for the next webinar. Uh, Ratna, Diksha, if you have any last comments, I'll also put down our email ID on the chat. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions. We'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to thank everyone for their participation, for sharing their experiences. I know that sort of talking about these things can be really hard if it's happening, after a really long time, or you have our ways of dealing with it. So to really come out and share it in a public platform like this can be really hard. So I really want to appreciate that it gives us so much more energy and so much more understanding of where you are coming from when we're talking about your stress. And that's really the most important aspect of doing this for us, is to really respond to your difficulties and how this is affecting you. So I want to thank everyone that shared their experiences and their feelings today, and it's been really great to do this. I'm really glad that it's been helpful also. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank everyone for giving us the space to have to create something like this and to have such discussions. They're really important for us to have, and it's been really insightful to have these conversations with all of you. I'd also like to thank everyone for being here and being so participative. And also in sharing insights, as well as sharing anecdotes that could help everyone understand this better. Thank you so much.
You said you're not well, huh? Maybe had some medicines,
Thank
have some
you,
coffee.
Diksha and Pratana. It was a wonderful session we had today, and we had a nice conversation, interactive mode we had, which is really helpful for us. Now I invite Shukendu to give us a concluding remarks of today's webinar.
Thank you, Surya. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to conclude the webinar. It was the second webinar that has been conducted with support from with technical support from Alternative Story and with support from HCL. So the topic for today's webinar was on managing lockdown-induced stress. And under this webinar, 3 technical sessions were conducted by resource persons from the Alternative Story. The webinar, it started with an welcome address, which was done by Anuradha Madam, the head of South Regional Resource Center. It was followed by a technical session, which was facilitated by Prarthana from Alternative Story. The agenda for today's, she started her session with a brief elaboration on the agenda of today's webinar, which was on understanding the mental impact of pandemic, defining the term called normal, using coping strategies to deal with mental health impact of pandemic. And in the next slide of our presentation, he covered various issues relating to some of the changes that has happened in domains like work, social life, family structures, public life and scope, sense of safety. Thereafter, facilitation was also done on aspects which were related to transition-induced stress, with emphasis on figuring out new ways of being and dealing with losses and uncertainty and its impact on our lives. This was followed by a presentation which was facilitated by Diksha. And in the context of her presentation, the topic that she covered was on pandemic's impact on mental health, and During her presentation, he emphasized on aspects relating to impact of like the pandemic on phenomena like sleep, appetite, mood, hypervigilance, impact on emotional regulations, anxiety, and access to safe places and lack of peer contact. This session was followed by the last technical session, which was facilitated by Rashi, and the session was about coping strategies. And during her session, he emphasized on aspects like social support, therapy, boundaries at home, news and work, and smoothing activities that could help in coping with stressful situations. So all these were some of the technical sessions which were facilitated by the respective resource persons. And as we all know that it was a very like interactive and a very productive sessions, and the indicator for it can be considered like with some of the questions that we have received and some of the answers that we got from our resource persons, and even like some of the participants, they also shared the kind of practical experiences that they are having in the context of this pandemic situation, and some of them were even able to relate the things which were disseminated with the kind of work that they are doing at the field level. Thank you, Surya.
Thank you, Shukendu. It was a brief, concluded remarks. We got it, and thanks for that. Now I would like to invite Arka to propose vote of thanks for it. Arka from CKHT.
Yes, good evening. This is Orko. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating in this, especially our resource person, Dipshika, Prarthana and Rashi. They have wonderfully described the issues that we're currently facing. And I will also like to thank Pratik for the technical support he has been giving. I would also like to thank Nirish for making this happen. I would like to thank Anuradha madam for welcoming this session, and I would lastly thank Halin madam for motivating this team and this sessions to come up. And last but not the least, I would like to thank all the participants who have joined and have taken this knowledge and helped this session successful. So I would like to thank everybody for their support and cooperation. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am, for your presence here. So this is the second session we have, and we have a lot more sessions coming forward.
Yeah, looking forward.
Yeah. So thank you once again.
So
Bye.
Thank you so much, the entire Childline team. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.